Tell us about your journey from where you were
Mhm.
10, 15 years ago to where you came today in terms of your journey from feminism.
Okay, I'll try to do this in the most condensed fashion because I've told the story many times.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a traditional home. Both my parents are Brazilian. Both my parents immigrated here to the States. And I grew up in a very traditional home. Mother was in the household, dad was working, he was an entrepreneur. Since then, my dad has passed away. So,
Sorry to hear that.
changes in the family. But growing up, I saw infidelity in my home. And that was one of the first, I guess, the wedges in the door to let feminism in. And,
Mm,
as a young child, I observed my parents' relationship and I was like, this dynamic is something that I don't want. I want to make my own money. I want to be the ruler, the master of my own life.
destiny.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's the path that I took. I went to school. After high school, I went to school for mechanical engineering, got a robotics degree. From there, I worked in oil and gas, which is
Mm,
very, very male oriented. I used to work on offshore rigs, onshore rigs for an oil and gas company. I was around men, but I had a lot of resentments towards men,
mm,
if that makes sense.
absolutely.
I was always challenging and wanting to compete with them to be the best of the best. I had this chip on my shoulder growing up because I wanted to be this woman who
Yeah.
overcame all these obstacles and whatnot. Fast forward, I left my oil and gas job. I started my own company at the end of 2015 and I had moved to New York. Okay.
Mhm.
So New York is the the breeding grounds for toxic feminism. All
It
right.
sounds like you've been boss babing your way through this, to be fair.
Yes,
Mm,
yes, I was forging my path forward.
yeah.
And I got very much like, so in high school I was like, why would women go to college to get married and have children? Made no sense to
Right.
me. I was
Yeah.
like, so that was the beginning stages, right? And then during my oil and gas career, I was like, oh, these men are annoying. Like, I can't stand them, but I have to work with them. And I was very much one of the guys, right? So I would curse to get the validation of being in the field. I
Yeah.
would smoke cigarettes, which is something I'm repulsed by now. These
Wow.
are the things
Mm,
that just to like be one of the boys, you know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah.
And
To be more
so
masculine, right?
to
To
be
be able
more
to fit in.
masculine.
Mm,
Exactly. And that was the first time I had cut my hair all off. So I've cut my hair, I think, well, total 4 times, like completely off. So in the oil and gas days, that was the first time because I didn't want to appear feminine. I wanted them to respect me and I didn't want them to
yeah.
objectify me in the fields. So fast forward, I'm in New York, the breeding ground for toxic feminism, and I start really deep diving into the ideology. You're part of all these women's groups, you're part of these boss babe networks, entrepreneurship. I had to fight for my seat at the table. I had to be at every event. I had to be this persona of a boss babe when
Mm,
inside I was like crumbling. I was playing this fictional character that I had created, right?
mm,
And I was miserable. And mind you, like, this was for years of doing this.
wow.
So I started my first company, sold that company, started my second company. That company failed during COVID, at the beginning of COVID. Basically, throughout my whole entrepreneurship experience, I
Mhm.
was tapped into all of the networks. I was at the marches. I was, you know,
Mm,
everything possible. And at the same time, I had chopped off all of my hair. I had dyed it blue, green, purple, pink, whatever, all the colors, right? And that's something that I'm sure we'll talk about later on, but feminism really makes women ugly. Like you're ugly on the inside and it translates to ugliness on the outside,
Mm.
okay?
Is the thinking behind that wanting to rebel against
Yes,
traditional ideas of beauty, feminine beauty in particular? Is that where that comes from?
that's exactly where it came from for me, right? I
Sure.
was like, I want to be the rebel. I want to be the outlaw. I want, you would watch these movies and I wanted to be that like superhero or like, I always loved Mad Max and I liked
Right.
Charlize Theron in it and like the shaved head. And she was always, you know,
A
figuring
badass.
it out, badass, right?
Right, yeah.
And that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to portray that
Mm,
so desperately. But my that's not my essence. I'm a
mm,
very empathetic person. I literally am an empath. I'm a highly sensitive person. So when I would get feedback, which was constructive feedback, I
mm,
internalized everything, broke down, like, needed space from other people,
mhm,
loved being around other people, but needed to get away and like be isolated for 2 days after that. And so I always look to these other women. I'm like, how do they do this?
mm,
How are they operating this way? And I
mm,
was also lonely, I had pushed so many men away. I wanted to compete with men. I had this attitude against them, like I was better than them. And it wasn't until I read Jordan Peterson's book, 10 Rules for Life, and I was like, whoa, everyone's telling me I have to blame everyone else, but this doesn't make sense. Like, I have to make my own bed,
mm,
right? Like, in that concept really stuck with me. I'm like, if I'm unhappy, that's a reflection of my choices.
mm.
And that's when the real work started to begin for me. And I was like, okay, when and I talked to friends and family members, and they're like, Rebecca, you're a miserable person to be around. And I was
Wow.
like,
Excuse me?
okay, great. Didn't expect that one.
You were trying to have heterosexual relationships at this time as well?
Yes,
How did
yes.
you even manage that? Like, how did
So
that even make sense?
it was interesting because until I met my husband, I was like, why do all the men just steer away from me? Like I would get into
Mm,
relationships, right? But then after a couple weeks or a couple months, it was like they didn't want to be around me. I
right.
would I would self-destruct. Essentially, I would be like, this is too
Mm,
good. I need to cause some I need to cause a
chaos.
ruckus, chaos.
Bring some chaos to the place. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what I realized, that I was like, every relationship that I've been in, I'm the one
Mm,
that made it destruct. And I thought about
wow.
that. I was like, because when you look at when you reflect, like when you actually have time to reflect on these things, you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm the problem. And then your whole world starts blowing
Just
up. Yeah.
sounds like accountability. Sounds like kryptonite. What is this? Oh no. Wow.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. And it didn't happen right away.
Mhm.
It took time and it took effort, right? It took effort from me because it's really easy to just be like, okay, cool, like still not my fault, just blame everyone. Yeah,
Yeah.
like it's
Peace
fine.
out.
Like
Yeah,
men
exactly.
suck, it's the patriarchy, and
Yeah.
that's the go-to response, right? That's what feminism teaches you as the go-to response.
Right.
And they're very crafty about this too. It's very well designed and well thought
Mm,
out. Um, and yeah, I bought into it. But then after I started having my own accountability, I started coming and I dropped, like, this is also big things that happened to me. I stopped drinking alcohol. I stopped going to parties. I stopped socializing with the same people. I realized, wow, you're a very draining individual. I can't be
Mm.
around you. I realized that I'm a very sensitive person. So anyone's energy and I hate that word energy, but like the person's spirit was heavy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when I started realizing and tapping into that, I was like, wow, I'm a very good judge of character. Why was I blocking this out? And
Wow.
I realized it was the drugs, the alcohol,
Mm.
like, it was all the things that I was caught up in and the ideology.